Hi there, YouTube. I'm Kelly. If this is your first time here, welcome to my channel. And if you're one of my regulars, welcome back. I'm going to be working on the Wolf Foundation paper piecing quilt again. And I'll show you how I like to do FPP. Maybe it's not your way, maybe it's not other people's way, but this works for me. But please feel free to search around and find a way that works for you, if you don't like how I do it. Because of how this quilt works, a lot of the pattern pieces are mirror images of each other, like 13 and 14. So I'm going to basically do these two at the same time, and I'll show you one of them. Pattern piece 13 is going to have 5 pieces of fabric on it. One of them is 13A, 13B, 13C, and 13E are the same fabric, and 13D is a different fabric. Now, I've almost got all these memorized because I've done several of these pattern pieces already, but for the sake of argument, we will look at the pattern and see. Okay, I'm trying to keep the glare to the minimum here. So the piece with the flowers on it, I call that flower power. There's 3 of them, that is cocoa. And the plus sign, that is terracotta. And the other one, that is gray with flowers in the middle, that's mahogany. So those are the fabrics we're going to use. Okay, let's have a look here at pattern 13. When I come across fabric I need, I go through all the pattern pieces and look for the biggest piece I can find that might use that fabric. That way, when I cut a strip off my fabric, I have a largest piece if I need a largest piece of fabric. Now, this mahogany, I don't really have that many big pieces that I need. So I just need to cover this amount on piece 13 and the same on piece 14. So let's just measure across and see where we are. Alright, the piece itself is about 3.5-ish, maybe a bit more. So let's give us a seam allowance over here, about like so, and the seam allowance out to the edge, and we'll call that 3.5. That should give me plenty. And this way it's not very big either. That's about 2.5. So I'll cut myself a piece that's big enough. And I have a piece of scrap here from another bit that I did, and this is going to be more than sufficient. Here, let me put this down. This is kind of a good way to test. Put your pattern piece on top. Oh yeah, loads. So I'm going to cut off a piece. Actually, I'll probably just cut it off right there at the fold, and then I'll do another piece about the same for the other one, and that should be just fine. When you're doing FPP, you either start with piece A or piece 1, or however the pattern numbering goes. And I have put this piece of mahogany, so there's a good bit of seam allowance around the whole pattern. Yes, I probably don't need all this, and yes, I'm probably going to be using more than I require. FPP does use up fabric, but under no circumstances attempt to short yourself with fabric. You will bitterly regret it. This is from experience. Don't. Give yourself a generous amount and you will be fine. So, I'm going to show you in 1 second how I make sure. If you have one of those light boxes, you can use it. I do have one. I use it sometimes, but easier and quicker. Hold it up to the light. If there's fabric all around your piece, by a good enough seam allowance, you're good to go. The next piece we sew on is piece B. And there is your sew line right there, between A and B. So in order to show a bit more where that sew line is, I fold it up over the edge of a ruler, sort of. Just lift it up, kind of like that. Run your fingers along it. This part does not have to be perfect. You just have to be fairly close to that seam line. That looks pretty good to me. Fold it all the way over. There. Now, that's your sew line all the way across. Flip it back over. Looks pretty good. Okay. Now we need to find a small piece of cocoa that goes around there and will be big enough. Now, just like usual, you sew right side to right side. But where the heck do I sew? Can't see the front, so this is what I do. Fold it over. Then I take a pen and I look back on the pattern, and you can kind of sort of do it with your thumbnail right about there. So if I make a mark right there on the edge, that's about congruent to the edge of that, plus a little bit of seam allowance. And then over here, the same, make a mark about like that. Then transfer those marks onto the back. So there's one there, and there's one there. Now we know how far across this way to go. So fold it down. I can fold your fabric down too. There's more than enough seam allowance on here. Okay. There, now we have that. So when we turn this around to line up, let's scoot this a bit more onto the actual sewing line and not there. That's fine like that. Okay, now we take this and we line it up on there. Let's go back further because we don't want to make short ourselves. So there's our sewing line right about there because there's the fold. So we have to go past there, so we have a seam allowance this way, because once it's sewn on, this piece of cocoa here is going to flip over and be pressed that way to cover that part of the pattern. Okay, so line that up about like that. All will become clear once I've sewn it. Before we get started sewing, let's check machine setup. Put your stitch length down shorter. More perforations across the line will mean the paper tears away better later. I'm also using a size 80-12 needle for the same reason. It's a bit larger, it punches bigger holes. Make sure whatever foot you have, you can see the needle going along the line easily. So I'm going to use this one. Okay, I got my phone so we can see this as close as possible. You see how my needle is just a shade over the edge of the line between 13A and 13B. Like so. So all the way across that line and stop one stitch just beyond the edge of 13A and 13B on the other side. You can stop right on the line, it doesn't matter. I do one stitch extra just to be sure. There we go. There's the seam between 13A and 13B. And that's what it looks like on the back. Okay, well, I guess technically this piece is the front. But for right now, it's the back. Next comes trimming. So, the way I always do this, so I don't mess it up, is I put the piece I just sewed on to my left. You can't see it, it's underneath the cocoa, or underneath the mahogany, but there it is, off to my left, okay? Like so. And I have one of these at a quarter rulers. There's a little bump here. There's an edge. So what you do, that seam you just sewed, fold it back, right on the seam. Really easy, because now it's all punched through there. It's super easy to fold. Fold it like that. Put your at a quarter ruler on it with the bump side down, and notch it up against the paper. So you now have a 1/4 inch seam between that sewing line you just did and the edge of the ruler. That's how you get your good seam. Cut it off. If you do not have one of these type of rulers, just use a regular ruler and give yourself 1/4 inch between the line you just sewed and the edge of the fabric, and you'll have a good seam allowance. Now we press back. Like so. So we can easily see that the cocoa extends out this way and out this way. It is more than enough surrounding piece 13B. In order to finish this pattern piece, you carry out that same procedure until you have all the pieces on. Sew, trim, press. Sew, trim, press. The next piece we do is 13C. That's our sew line. That's where we do the folding, like so. This flower pattern is also cocoa, so I need a big enough piece of cocoa that goes from there about. Other side of that mark is about 1/4 inch to the seam allowance. Other side of this mark, the edge of the dots, that's the edge of the seam allowance. So it has to be this big this way, and it has to be big enough this way to be a seam allowance here, and to cover the whole outer corner, because that's where the seam allowance goes all the way around. Piece 13D requires terracotta fabric, so I grabbed my scraps. I put some of my larger trimmings up on the design wall, just in case I needed a littler piece. So let's see if this will work. Yes, most likely. Let's see there. That's not bad. Maybe a little tight this way. Maybe this one's a bit wider. Let's see here. Might not work. Might need to cut a piece. Well, if you go that way, that might work. That's not bad. Let's see. Sometimes you gotta do some fiddling. So just be patient and figure it out. Yeah, that'll be fine. Okay, so if I put that there, there's the corner. Yeah, that's about right down there. That looks pretty good there. So I'll make a little mark. I want to cut it off. Give myself enough room. I'll mark about down there. Trim that off. And I'll do about the same on this one because I need a piece for 14 as well, and I'll mark it right about the same spot, and that way will be good for pattern piece 14. On piece 13 now. I'm going to make my stitch length bigger. I'm going to put it up at 3 because I had it at 1.5 for doing the seams, and I'm going to sew around just to keep everything together, because this is kind of a biggish piece and you don't want stuff flapping around and whatever. Between the edge of the pattern and the dotted line that is the edge of the seam allowance, I just run a line along there. Most likely I'll be taking them out, but it depends on how the piece goes together. Maybe I don't even need to. But just to keep everything stable and firm, I'm going to do a victory lap around the edge with a largish basting type stitch. Like so. Before I say a piece is finished and I pin it up to the design wall, I trim it. So, let's use this side because the 1/4 inch line is a bit more obvious. So, put your 1/4 inch line on your ruler on the solid line along the edge of the pattern. Okay, that's where you want your seam allowance to go. And then it goes out to the dotted line on the pattern, which is the edge of the seam allowance. And I scoot it out just a hair past the dotted line. Brace my ruler. Trim it up. Like that. I do the longer sides first. And after I trim this off, this piece will be fine for the other piece for 14E, I think. Whoops, better brace that so I don't lose it. Wiggle it around. There we go. Yeah, that's probably okay. I'll put that with 14. Scrap there. That might be a good scrap to keep too. And we don't need the big long ruler for the other side. We'll just use this one. So, same procedure. 1/4 inch on the solid line. Scoot it just a touch. And trim it off. Voila. Piece 13. Good to go.